Hello! In today's video, we're going to show you how to use local LLMs in PowerPoint VBA to make trivia game slideshow presentations like this one. The local LLMs are used to make the questions and the answers, and then we use VBA scripts to help process that information and then put it into a slideshow like this one. So if you're interested in learning more about this, stay tuned and we're going to go over it. Okay, so just a couple of things before we get started. I'm already assuming that you have Ollama and Microsoft Office installed on your machine. And you must keep in mind that we are working with local models, okay? So these aren't going to be as performative as some of the models you'll find in the cloud. They're not going to be as fast. They're going to be pretty slow, and it's going to take a minute or two to probably churn out useful information from these models. Sometimes also the questions and answers won't come back in the format that you want. This example will actually show you a demonstration of that, where we tried to make a query to a local LLM and it did not put the questions and answers in the format we were expecting. Sometimes that just happens and you can just rerun it and that will fix it. In some of those cases though, using prompts and really is your way of making sure that everything is returned in the way you're expecting. Okay, so you definitely need to use the prompts in a specific way, which we will also show you. So for example, the questions and answers should look like this. Q colon, what color is the sky? A, blue. If they return it, if the LLM returns the information like this, then we'll be able to easily pick out the questions and answers based off of those Q and A tags that we added, right? And the final thing is, in some cases, the questions may not make sense, right? So, um, for example, it may ask you what color is a red guitar, and then in that case, well, the color's red. It doesn't really make sense. It's not really a hard question. Sometimes you may just get some questions like that, and sometimes the questions may also be wrong. And so, in all of those cases, you just go back and double check the questions, and if anything doesn't make sense, you can always take the question out. You can swap it out for another one. Whatever you want to do. Using the local LLMs is just a way to help build out all those questions for you to help you not have to worry about thinking up all of these different questions to put into the slideshow. Okay, so these are basically the steps we're going to take. The first thing that we're going to do in this workflow is clean up the presentation, which basically means if we have trivia questions, answers, or slides from a previous trivia game that we made, it's going to clean up all of those slides and remove them. That step will probably actually be added at the very end, so stick around for that as well. And where we're actually going to start is by showing you how to use the Ollama local API to get the trivia questions. And once we have that figured out and we get the actual response from Ollama, we're then going to extract those questions and answers from the JSON string that we get returned. And then once we have all that information, which will basically be just the questions and answers, we're going to then take those questions and answers and then build out a whole new slide deck. So stick around and we're about to get started. Okay, to get started, we're going to look at creating an API request to our local LLM instance and looking at what the response looks like. Okay, so to start, you need to have a URL to your Ollama instance, the model you want to use, and you want to create a prompt. Okay, and so in this case, since we're doing a trivia category game, we also want to include a trivia category and a number of questions variables to pass into the prompt. Okay, and then this variable is just to hold the actual response that we get back as a string. And then from there, we can start working with it to actually extract all the questions and answers out. Okay, so now we set the category, we set the number of questions. In this case, for readability and simplicity, I just wanted to create a trivia game about guitars, and I only want 2 questions. And then we have to set the URL, which This is the default one with Ollama, and then this is the model I'm going to use, which is Gemma 4 E4B. Okay, so the prompt is a little bit important because the way that you build your prompt out is going to determine how you get this information back. And so ideally, we want to create a prompt that will give us consistent results, which means if I want 2 questions or 3 questions, it's going to return those questions and answers back in a format that we can predict and we can properly parse and process. Okay, so that's all I'm doing here. I'm basically just telling it that it's an automated system that generates trivia questions, and I want to make trivia for guitars. Can you provide 2 questions? Separate each question with a semicolon. Do not use new line characters in your response. And then this is an example of the kind of format that I want for the questions and answers. Okay? And so if I can get this kind of format back, it will be a lot easier for us to go and process this information, because then we can split everything up based off of this question, this answer, and then these semicolons. And we'll get more into that later once we get this part finished, right? So in order to build this response out, we have to generate an HTTP request. And so that's what this function does. We just pass in our Ollama URL, the model we want, and then the prompt that we created. And then we just create a simple post request. Okay? And then this request body contains all the information that we need to actually send to Ollama. And then once we get this response back, if everything's good, we get the actual response. Otherwise, we're going to say we failed to generate a response. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this sub procedure, and then the results that we get back are going to be printed to the immediate window. So this may take a minute, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now, and then I will pick back up once this is finished. Okay, so now we have our response, and it's going to be kind of a larger JSON format. But the only thing we're really concerned with is this response right here. Okay? So it looks like it didn't do what I wanted it to. So we're going to try this again and see if we can get a better response. And every now and then this happens too, but we're going to run it again and see what happens. Okay, so now this is the new response, and this is more of what we're looking for. Okay, so we have our Q for our question, and then we have our answer, and it's separated by a semicolon, and it does the same thing again here, which is what we're looking for. That's good. Okay, so now that we have all of that information, what we want to do is go ahead and figure out how we can extract this response. So that will be the next thing we look at. Okay, so there are a bunch of different ways you could go about getting this information out of the JSON string. I'm just going to use split. And so what the split function does is you pass in your string, you tell the string what you want to split it on, and then that itself will return an array, okay, of whatever's left after you split everything up. Okay, and so in this case, since we only have response showing up once, it's going to split that string right where response is. Okay, and so since our information comes after the response part of the JSON, we want to get the second item in the array. And since VBA does everything with 0 indexing, we're going to get the first object, or the first string that we get back. Okay, so this is going to start with that. And then at the very end of our questions and answers, the next thing that comes up is done, followed by this comma that comes afterward. So we're going to split again on this, and we're going to return the first item in the array, which then leaves us with the questions and answers. Okay, so I'm going to run this again, and then you'll see only that part come up. So I'm going to pause again and let this run, and then you'll see that we now have the processed questions and answers. Okay, now that it's done running, we now have the questions, the answers, and everything is separated by the semicolons. And this is exactly what we want. So now we have to do the same thing to break out the questions and answers. And so we will probably use more splitting to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and write up that function, and then I will return once that is taken care of. Okay, so now we're going to look at splitting up the questions and answers into their own separate question and answer variables, so then we can put them into separate slides. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this debug.print, or I'm going to comment it out. I won't remove it yet. And then I'm going to start working on this section here. Okay, so basically we have an array. Anytime you work with an array in VBA, you have to use these parentheses to distinguish that it's an array of strings. Okay, so we're going to have our question and answer sets, and that's where we're going to split on semicolon, and then we're going to split it out even further to get a question and answer. Okay, and so in order to do a for each loop, which would probably be the easiest way to loop through everything, you have to define a variable and save it as a variant. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we will split the data we got back, which, if you remember, was that long string with the Q and the A and the semicolons and the questions and answers. And we're going to split it based off the semicolons that we told the prompt to do earlier, to separate each question out. Right? And so then once we have that, now all of our question and answer sets are split up. So now we have to be able to extract the questions and answers. So then we will loop through each of them. And we will then get the question by splitting on that capital A character and then getting the first item in that array that's returned. And so that will be the question. However, once we get that back, we're still going to have that Q in front, in the semicolon in front of the question. And so we'll use this mid function to actually get rid of that Q as well. Okay. And then to get the answer, we're just going to split the question answer combo again. And this time we're going to get the first item in the array. And then that will give us our question and answer, and we will debug and print it. And then we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, now that we have the questions and answers in their own variables, we can then go ahead and start building the slide deck out. I wanted to create a subroutine for that. In this case, I called it add slide because, depending on how crazy you want to get with formatting the slides and doing everything else, that may add some extra lines to this for loop, which we kind of want to avoid if we can, especially with stuff that's going to consistently be used over and over again. So in this case, I created another sub procedure called add slide, where you pass in your question and your answer. And then you create your question and answer slides. You add it to the active presentation, and you set the layout here. And this specific one, PowerPoint layout text, is the default one that you normally see, where you have the title and then you have the text box under that you can add bullet points to and everything else. So this makes it a little bit easier to add the stuff later on, because once you create the slide, you can then say, I want to get the first shape, which is that title bar, get the text frame, and set the text to the question. Okay, and then for the answer slide, the one that follows, you do the same thing, except this time that bigger text box you now set to answer, and that will show you what that looks like. Okay, so now this is pretty much what it looks like at this point in time. So the first slide is generated with the question, the second slide has the answer, and then the second question, and then we have the second answer here. Okay, and now this is all good. We've pretty much gotten to the point where we told our LLM model that we want a certain number of questions about guitars for trivia, and we wanted it in a certain format so that we could properly go through and parse it. And now we have it populating into Excel, right? So that's good. The last thing we need to look at is to properly clean this up, right? Because if we keep running this over and over, as it stands, it's going to keep adding more slides and it's not going to reset the trivia game. So now we need to go add some code to go through here and clean up all the slides. And also, we may want to add a title here. So let's see if we can get that figured out too. Okay, back in the code, we now have two new sub-procedures to work with. Okay, so the first one that we have listed is to add the title slide, which basically just adds the first slide to the slide deck here, and it sets the layout of that slide to be the title slide, right? And then within the first text box, we just set its text value to have the title that we pass in. And then under this sub procedure, remove slides, this basically just counts how many slides we have in the current PowerPoint presentation, and if we have more than 0, we remove the first one that we see. So those are now up here in the main function, or the main sub procedure, sorry. So the first thing we do is we remove all the slides that we have, and then we create the title slide, which we call trivia game and trivia category. In this case, it's guitars. Okay, so that should pretty much take care of everything. And now we're going to run this sub procedure that will make an API call to Ollama with the specific model we specified, with the prompt that we told it to explicitly give us the number of questions that we asked for about guitars in a specific format that we can then parse and process. And then we're going to go through, we're going to take that information, we're going to get the questions and answers in a single string. We're then going to take that single string and we're going to split up the questions and answers from that string. And then for each question and answer that we have, we're going to create a new slide in PowerPoint. Okay, so now we're going to run this and we will see what the final output looks like. Okay, now that the LLM has finished processing all of the questions and answers and gave us a response, and we were able to parse all of the data and put it into our slideshow with our wonderful VBA script, we now finally have our trivia game. So here's the title screen with guitars. And so here are our questions. So here's the first question. Here's the question with the answer. Here's the second question with the answer, so on and so forth. And so the cool thing with this is that you can use this for pretty much any kind of category that you want. Just keep in mind that some of the questions may not be right. You may want to go back and double check it, and make any corrections or change out any of the questions that you want. But this is kind of a just a quick way to play with some VBA code and kind of, I guess, get a baseline for whatever kind of trivia you want to do, right? So yeah, the thing with the AI models is that you want to get some ideas. You get the information, you have it do the creative side of asking all the right questions, getting you the answers, and then you use the VBA code to put it in a specific format that you can then automate for stuff like this, right? So, well, I hope this was helpful, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.